So the first one in our series of tutorials for the Mari extension pack is the texture scatter 2D node, which is the big node for this release, and it's a full-on texture bombing node with a little bit of a twist that it can create fully tileable textures up to 32K resolution. And while in Mari, I'm just gonna use the tab menus, the quick find menu that you get when you hover over the layer palette and press tab, and then just create the texture scatter 2D node. And I have a plane here, a standard Maya plane, which has full UV coverage. But before we do anything, there's one word of advice I have for Windows users, and only for Windows users. The node is quite complex. It's usually used in offline rendering, this kind of thing. Windows has a very nasty feature which is called the display driver timeout. Basically, after 2 seconds of inactivity, Windows decides that your NVIDIA driver or your display driver has crashed, even though it might not have. It might just be a very complex operation. So to get around that, whenever you flatten or bake, you need to set in your preferences under the GPU tab the max render size for baking to 256, or at least lower than the 1K that it's at default. And that is kind of unrelated to the power of your graphics card. Obviously, with bigger, faster graphics card, you have a bit more leniency. But even on the biggest graphics card, you can easily get this crash. It's just a very, very complex node. At least this way, when you set this setting, you can still convert to paintable no matter the complexity. However, if you layer multiple nodes on top of each other and then try to flatten the entire channel at once, you might still get that crash, and in that case you might have to individually convert to paintable first. So that's the word of advice, but instead of talking what I can't do, let's talk about what I can do. And I'm just gonna take this crappy little internet texture of some gravel and try to make a tileable texture out of it. So I'm just gonna drag this under texture map A, and I will get immediately something. And the first thing you will want to do is get rid of some of the harshness of the edges and get some blending. You can see a seam here. So you want to blend this a little bit. And for this purpose, each texture map, A, B, C, D, has 3 dedicated sliders for this. The edge sliders. So that's edge fall off, softness, and roundness. The fall off will determine the clipping point at which point your alpha gets clipped, and the softness kind of determines the gradient length from the point of the fall off. And then last but not least, the roundness switches between a square fade off and a radial fade. So I've got something here. Let's talk about size a little bit. You can see we have some different size cells here, and when I talk about cells, I talk about each texture repetition, and that is caused by the randomized scale. So if I change the randomized scale value here, you can see I'm getting some shift in sizes. However, not for everything. There's some cells that remain at their fixed size, and that is determined by the original scale slider, which basically is a percentage of cells that are kept at the original size that is determined on the global scale. So if I turn this to 0 and change the randomized scale, I get full randomization. If I increase the original scale, I get less. But for this purpose, I'm just going to turn this off, set everything to 0, and then just experiment a little bit. First with the size, just find some suitable size for this gravel. And there's a scene size slider up here. For example, if I have a very small value, so I have a scale value of 0.001, and if this is still not small enough, you can decrease the scene size and you get even finer results. But for this purpose, I'm just going to leave it at the regular slider sizes. Just a little bit. And let's talk about density a little bit. So at the top here, this is the density group, and the first slider determines the density per layer. So the secret of the texture bumper is it runs in multiple loops. So it adds a layer and runs all processing again, and then adds another layer, offsets it a little bit, and so forth. And the density determines the density per layer. Even with full density, I still get pretty large gaps, so in this case I need to increase the layer count. Like I said, the layers is the amount of loops that I run, and it's a linear decrease in performance. So if you double the layer count, you will get half the performance. It's that easy. But let's see what we get. The system's gonna get quite slow. And you can see I still have some gaps here. I might not be able to fill it. I might have to create another node on top and try to, cover those holes. You can also try and use the noise setting, and basically the noise is the scale of the noise that's used to generate the cells, the grid distribution of the cells, I should say. So if you scale this up, you will get a larger noise, and if I scale it down, I might get better results. So it depends. It's hard to see here, but if we lower the density a little bit, you can see here I seem to be getting denser results with higher noise counts and sparser results with lower noise settings. So you can kind of use that to your advantage. Let's up this again. Let's try to get something. Let's see if we can fill these gaps. Might not be able to. You can see the performance is already quite slow for this one node. I'm gonna try something. As of Mari 2.6, you can enter values above the slider ranges. So in this case, the slider is maxed out at 15 for the layers, but I can enter a higher value just by entering a number outside and try to fill in the gaps this way. I still won't be able to 100%. I'll just leave it at that for now. Let's increase the size a little bit. You might have to generate another one, but for now, for this purpose of this demo, it's fine with me. And I'm just gonna cache this node because you don't want to have multiple instances or multiple texture scatter nodes active at the same time. However, I don't want to convert to paintable quite yet because I want to have access to this node in its live form when creating displacement maps and stuff like that. So I'm just going to cache it for now. It should be reasonably fast. I tried it with a 16K, 32K map, and baking is usually at between 3 and 6 minutes. So for 32K that is. So now we have flattened that, or we have it at least in a live form, and performance is back to normal. I'm just going to create a grade node and adjust the color of this a little bit to some soil color. And then create a second texture scatter node. And use some of my leaf textures here, just drag it in. Texture B, drag in another texture. Texture C, some autumn leaves, and texture map D. I'll put in some stick textures. You might have noticed that nothing happened after I dragged in texture map A. That is because you need to activate each texture first. And the size relationship between the leaves and the sticks is not correct yet, so I'm going to go up to the global scale, and there you can find a scale multiplier for each map. So I can only scale down at the moment, I cannot scale up, so you'll have to set the maximum size of each cell, or of all your cells, in the global scale based on the biggest texture you want, more or less. So the sticks are the biggest items, so I'll adjust the size to have the correct stick size and then scale down my leaf textures. And while we're at the matter of texture sizes, it's probably worth noting that in these map A, B, C, D, you should not be using too high resolution maps. So keep in mind how it's going to look at the end. So for example, these leaves are quite small, so a 256 map would probably be perfectly fine, although it's a 1K map at the moment. But I would not put an 8K leaf texture in here, because it is going to slow you down. So let's find a size that works for us. Increase the density a little bit while we're at it. And I want some randomization of the scale for the sticks. However, I don't want it on the leaves, so I'm just going to use the map A, B, C randomization mix and just basically turn off the randomization for the first 3 texture maps and just have it on the sticks. And it's a good start. A bit too many autumn leaves, so I'm just going to scroll onto my texture map and change the importance. So you can see that replaces it with other textures, and it's a linear stack, so when you change the importance of texture map C, you're gonna get more of texture map A and B, and if you're gonna change the importance of texture map D, you're gonna get more of texture map A, B, and C. It depends, whatever's below it will get more importance. So let's change that. And the sticks are a bit too evenly, so we use another feature which is called clumping. You'll see global clumping here, which will basically just remove cells in between to create some kind of clumping effect. And each texture has another one as well. So I'll just remove some of the sticks. And these sliders will work together, so if I change the clumping overall, it will work. It will multiply on top of each other. We currently have the force to tileable turned on, which generates a tileable texture, as you would imagine. If you turn it off, what it does, it adds an offset to each layer. So that breaks tileability, but it gives you more random results. So if we just lower the scale here a little bit, I'm just going to increase this layer count a little bit. With force to tile on, you can kind of see like a little bit of a grid pattern. In certain cases, depends. I mean, there's so much randomization at the moment already that it's not as noticeable. But if you turn force to tile off, you get generally more randomly distributed maps. But what that affects is the clumping. So on the left side, we have clumping changes with force to tile on. You can see it's a very predictable result. It removes clusters in between to create other clusters, while on the right side with force to tile off, it basically redistributes the textures each time, and even in the end with the maximum clumping, you don't have as pronounced a cluster as you would with the other one. But for now, let's keep force to tile on and just find some scale again. Works for us. So we have some clumping, we have some scale randomization. What we're missing at the moment is some HSV shift. So again, I'm going to reduce my layer count just to keep things a little bit faster. I'm just going to play with the hue and saturation just to get some more random results and add some value shift. There's a seed at the bottom, you can change things. I'm getting pretty crazy colors, especially on the autumn leaves. The hue shift is pretty pronounced, as you can see. So I'm just going to go down to my texture, and there's a hue set shift mix and a value shift mix. And you can just say how much of the hue shift you want to have applied to your texture. Let's quickly talk about two settings at the bottom of the HSV shift group, which is the value offset and the layer attenuation. Basically, the layer attenuation will add a value or subtract a value for each layer, so you can use it to build up values, especially for displacement maps. That's gives you quite good layering. So if I just add values, you can see I'm getting value shifts here, but not for everything, because the lower layers will not have the full value added. So if I set this to -1, you can see I get some that are going black, while others stay right. And same with +1. Some values go up, some leaves go up in value, others don't. And some are getting quite bright, so I'm just going to use the value offset, which subtract a value from all of them. For this layer attenuation value offset to work, just make sure that your value shift mix on each texture is at 1 or something comparably, because if I set this lower, you can see I'm not getting any value shift anymore. So that's just important to remember, especially when creating your displacement maps. And let's up our layers. That's the last step. And then let's cache our layers. And now, in order to show the remaining features of the texture scatter node, I'm just going to create another one. And just drag one texture in here. And you can see we don't have any alpha for this map. So there's a bunch of alpha options available, like alpha's luminance and invert luminance. So you can use that to get something out of it. And also, just leave it here. There's blend modes for each cell. So you have the global blend mode for the entire node, obviously, but also a node that determines how the cells between each other blend. So if I set this to screen, you can see I'm getting something. And I'm just gonna remove this for now, because it doesn't really do anything. We now want to get this into our image manager to use as a tileable texture. So for Mac and Linux users, you usually just basically you select your patch, you go to the patches and go to patch the image manager, which is one of the new items we added with the extension pack. Again, Windows users, you might be out of luck, especially because you have two texture scatter 2D nodes, so you're compounding the effect of your possible display driver crash. So you might have to duplicate the node and convert it to paintable one by one. I'm just gonna save at this point and just try my luck. And that seems to work fine. Like I said, it heavily depends on the amount of layers you have in the texture scatter nodes if you get this crash or not. And now we have our combined node. And if you create a tileable texture with the tiled module, and we're just gonna plug this in here. And if I apply an offset, you can see everything tiled perfectly. Now, because I have everything live, I can easily create a copy of my channel and replace the textures with something more suitable for displacement. So in order to do that, I'm just gonna use a feature out of Mari that is not very well known, which is you can disable the viewport refresh, because if I duplicate now, I will remove the caching in the duplicated channel. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the viewport just by pressing, in my case, Shift and F12. And by default, it won't work. work with Shift F12 for you. So you go to your shortcuts and you search for toggle shader compiling, and that will basically disable your viewport. So I'm just gonna do a copy paste of my channel and name this displacement. And I'm gonna keep my channel, my viewport deactivated. I'm just gonna replace my texture with something that is sculpted for displacement. I don't have anything here. I'm just gonna desaturate the rest. And you see I'm flying a bit blind here, but that's fine. I can save this and then turn on my viewport again. What's going on? Oh, I have a grade note, obviously. So I'm just going to do this and let's quickly cache this again. Activate the second one. Remember, I replaced the textures with a displacement texture, at least for one of them, and the rest still is desaturated. However, like I was saying before, because I have a mix on my hue saturation, you can see I have a hue sat shift mix of 0.23, so the saturation I'm applying is not fully applied. So I'm just gonna up this to 1 again, and now I have fully white result. And again, you can use the layer attenuation to your advantage, as you can see, to get build up of textures. And then we just go ahead and, bring this into the image manager again, and we have a matching displacement map, well, at least in this case, sort of, for our color map. And that's pretty much it for the texture scatter node. I hope you like it. It's certainly quite useful. It has saved me already a bunch of time. And yeah, enjoy.